Okay, this is the gear shift lever on my Quad Runner 250 1996 model. It's just the two-wheel drive version. It's got the thematic fan there. I'm interested in building a lever gear shift for it, and one that has a knob up the top here and is attached to the gear lever down here in some fashion. I found this piece of tube which I think is flattened round tube. It looks a bit ugly on this end, but it's pretty uniform the rest of the way along, and the top will be cut off. It's just a piece of scrap that I think needs to be mounted vertically when the gear shift is sitting in its normal position, so that it can lean forward when you push the lever down. Would normally push the lever down and come back this way when you're changing into a gear. So it needs to sit pretty much at right angles to that section of the gear shift, be on an angled mount both this way and that way on this section of the tube. Rather than work on the ground, which I hate doing, the first thing I'm going to do is remove the pedal and take it to the bench. Now I've already released the pivot point on this pedal. This is a 10mm bolt, 10mm headed bolt. Goes through the pedal and releases out the top. You'll see there's a spacer in the centre of the pivot point which is greased. To get it, remove it completely, I've also loosened this for the sake of the video. That nut on the top there needs to be released right up there so that this can come out. And so I've now got the pedal with the cable still attached there. There's the spacer in between there. It's effectively the bearing surface. It's got O-rings on it and keeps the grease in. Now around this side there is a cotter pin which needs to be removed to remove the cable from it, and that's what I'm going to do now. I've got these pieces of I think they're 1/8 or 3mm strips that already have these round ends and holes on them, and 3 of them together fit up inside my tube fairly snugly. I'm thinking about running this pedal, removing the centre one there, or cutting it on an angle that matches the angle I want on this pedal, which is probably somewhere around there. That leaving an edge for this pedal to support, and then using the holes of the other pieces to put a clamp on it. That's my current thoughts. These are all long pieces that are going right up inside that tube at the moment. They'll be cut off to lighten it later and probably welded in. I'm going to mark out some pieces and create effectively a slot between these 3 pieces, and the pedal itself's a bit over 3mm wide. It's got a kink in the middle of it as a stiffener. So being wider than 3mm, a bolt through there will clamp onto it pretty well. So let me go ahead and have a go at that. Now you can see out of these 3 layers I've cut a piece out of that middle layer on the angle that I expect will be about right for this pedal. It'll fit in there, something like that, and the middle pieces pushed together to support that pedal on both sides. and then this piece will slide up and bolt down and form part of the clamp. As I said, these are very long at the moment, enabling me to manoeuvre things around, but I've cut those angles to try and match the slope on the pedal. They're not both the same because the pedal's not parallel at that point, and this bolt will sit up and go through all three layers, so it won't be in the way of the pedal like it just saw. So I'll put that bolt in there and tighten it up with just the pieces like that. This is just a bit of a mock-up at the moment, but that pedal is, you can see the clamp is not tight. That middle piece there is in fact loose there, but the top edge of it is angled to suit the pedal, and this piece here is angled to suit the pedal, and I think that's enough for me to mount the whole pedal back on the bike with this lever arm, and this isn't in as far as I'd like at this stage. So I'll put 2 screws in there to clamp at this stage. They're temporary screws. You can see how the upper piece is bowed up over the lever as part of the clamping. I was using those vice grips to hold things together while I was putting that second screw in, which was mainly holding the centre leaf up tight against the lever, and you can see here it's up tight there, and likewise on the other side. This little piece in the centre here, which is still loose, I may tack weld it to the bottom piece. Well, I can't really, because it needs to be removable so that I can remove the lever. So I'm not sure whether it may get a little washer above there to make it tight, because it's not tightening down on it at the moment, which is not a major problem, but I think I've done enough to do a mock-up to mount this back on the bike to see whether the angles and things are about right. Okay, that's the lever back mounted on the bike. I've looked at it's still got the twist in it, if you like, because it's twisted this way to follow the pedal. You can hear it click there, and then there, that's up and down. It's securely mounted here at the moment, so it's not flopping around, and so it's going through its paces, and I can show you the neutral light comes on there. It goes for first gear, neutral, first gear, second gear, first gear, back to neutral. Now, whether we've got a problem with the amount of movement required, you can see against the quad runner sign there and the seat. To change up a gear, I'm bringing it right back to there, and its position where it's not being used is sitting there, which I think is fine. It's coming right over to there to drop back. I assume the commercial versions of these do exactly the same thing. There is quite an angle of movement required to operate this pedal. I can't see unless there are major changes done to the linkage to shorten up that angle. Obviously it doesn't take much pressure to do this. You know, I have actually had trouble with my foot operating it. I'm also thinking that I'm not too concerned that this isn't pointing directly forward. It's around on an angle, but that angle tends to match the same angle as the plastic here. The plastic is gently rubbing on it in its current position, but I don't think that's much of a problem either. It moves along the plastic there and up into this corner here, which is actually fine at the moment. I adjusted this a little bit to make that a little bit more vertical, and that involved raising the pedal a little. I'm not sure whether the idea of the pedal height is that it's just level with the pedal, should be the same height as the rest here. I think it's more like that now that I've adjusted this a little bit, and it's made this lever completely vertical, but it sort of works in that space okay. So I'm fairly happy with that. I'm going to go ahead and do some welding on that end to lock it in, and then consider what I'm going to do, chop this off and put a nice knob on the top. But otherwise, reasonably happy with that. I will change those bolts out to make them a bit neater as well. So that's my shit welding. They're the three pieces. That top piece, you can see the angle in it. You can see inside there that the centre piece is cut on an angle, and the clamping screws. Reasonably happy with this end. I'm going to move on and have a play with the other end of this bar, trying to make a screw fitting to fit a knob. So a bit of tidying up, cut that rubbish off and come back to a square end, and then put a sort of fish mouth in the end to install a piece of 10mm rod in the end and weld it in. So let's go ahead and do that. You can see why I call this a fish mouth technique. I'm going to continue to squash this in until these come together, and that will leave around a 10mm hole in the end there, which I can then weld a piece of rod in, leave a bit of thread sticking out this end to screw a knob on. That's an M10 bolt and nut welded in to that fish mouth, and chicken shit welding that's been cleaned up a little bit on the linisher. That will certainly hold a ball knob for the change. I'm reasonably happy with how that turned out. Now it's time to go back and mount the pedal across here. I'm going to find some new bolts, and this end one probably needs a washer to hold the spacer a little bit firmer. Okay, that's the pedal bolted in with some new bolts. I'm going to remove some of this excess material around here, try and blend it a little bit more. I'll use the angle grinder initially to take some chunks off that, maybe back to about that diameter around that nut, and fillet it back there as best I can on the linisher and angle grinder. So just a tidy up thing. I've radiused that end a little bit. It's probably, again, not as tight as it could be, but you can see the way that clamps on there. The little washer I fitted in there behind the cut spacer I must have cut down to the same radius as that washer. So that clamps, and the spacer that's in the centre there can come out to label a pet to be taken off the pedal. But you can see one bolt there has more threads on one side than the other because it's clamping a thicker material on the pedal. Anyway, that's that end done. I'm happy with the fish mouth and the thread in that end. So the next step is to make a knob. Well, it's pretty dark in here at the moment. That's the lever attached. I don't know whether I've got it too tall. Interesting how it goes in operation, whether this movement is a bit ridiculous. It's I would have liked it to be a lot shorter swing, but it probably puts a bit more strain on the pivot point. Anyway, I think I'll be still not happy with this end. On testing on the bike, I can still get a little bit of movement there. Clock, clock, clock. I don't know whether you can see that, but I need to rectify that. I'll see we've got to come up with some ideas. Part of the problem, I believe, is that where we're clamping across here is this edge and that edge are not parallel. There's a twist in the pedal. You probably can't see it in the video, or you may be able, when I get it down there, you see that this point's lower and high over there. And that, so I didn't want to damage the pedal, and I certainly don't want to drill holes in it. I'm going to file across there to try and get a flat patch, at least between the edges. It's still hollow in the middle. It can remain hollow in the middle. I just want these edges, which will contact my plate, to be parallel. So I've got a big file that I'm going to give it a run there. So I've filed there, and you can see the unevenness. Those silver bits now are flat across there where my plate bolts on. I've created a little bit of a ridge just there, but that won't have weakened the pedal. That flat patch will be better for bolting in the clamp. With it twisted, I think they really only had sort of an edge here and an edge here or something touching, and it wasn't effective, so we'll see how we go now. So in redesigning this, I cut that piece off, which I think might be able to be the clamping piece, which can be removed, which enables the to sit in here like that and have a piece up here where my finger's tapping welded into place, and then the pedal can be removed by taking the cover plate off the top and lifting it out. This pedal's now sitting better on there. It's not rocking around like it was before, and with the piece on the bottom there welded in place and tied up against it, it may well be enough to stop the pedal moving like this, which it was previously. So I'm moving on. I'll weld that piece on the bottom. That's the pedal clamped on there with the vice grips tight up against the angle on the lever, and then the small piece on the bottom that creates the groove that lever fits in, the small piece is temporarily bolted on here until I weld it. I'm not going to weld the pedal, but I'll weld this little piece on, which is jammed up tight against the pedal. Should stop the pedal moving in relation to the lever, and the clamp will go on top. So that's the new idea. I'm going to tip this up and get some weld on here and here to weld that little piece in place. There's a couple of washers and the bolt obviously through there at the moment, just to raise it up above the lever and hold things in place tight. Okay, I've welded this piece on the end here and the washer on top, and you can see how this line across here and that line, they're not parallel. I'll take the pedal out. I've formed this neat groove here that with the fixed piece at the top and the welded piece on the bottom there, that now takes this pedal. I've put a couple of scribe marks on there as to where that fits, and if it's in that far, it shouldn't move. If it slides out this way, there'll be some movement, but because it's sort of a tapered fitting, it can go in to there. Now I'm going to play around with the clamp on the top and see whether it clamps it sufficiently. I've got that pedal sitting in that groove across there, and I've scribed a line here and here as to where I want it to sit that way. The problem still is it can work its way out because it's tapered there, and if it gets any movement it will walk its way out in that direction. Here's the original top piece that screws on and clamps it there, which seems to clamp it well, but I'm still concerned that it can walk its way out. So what I'm doing next, I said I didn't want to modify the pedal, I didn't want to drill holes in it, but I've chicken shit welded a washer on there that leaves an edge that rubs across here, and there's the scribe line there and there as to where it needs to go when it's in there like that. I welded that on one side, but it's actually wants to walk out in this direction, that way, and so it needs something across this end as well to stop it walking out that way. All of this is just to try and create a firm joint here that doesn't alter the pedal too much. Sure, I've filed it and now I've welded that thing on the back, but if the lever's not in place you wouldn't know these bits were welded on the back. It just looks original. So that's what I'm going to do, weld another washer on there and clamp it up, and hopefully at that stage, because I've had 3 attempts at this now trying to make a firm joint, even with this on its own was not enough to lock it in. So that's my next thing, weld another little washer across there and bolt it up, and then I think I should be done. So let's proceed with that. There's another washer tacked on the other side there before I put it on the grinder and clean it up a little bit. I think that one actually went a bit neater than this side, but serves the same purpose of locking this in, so hopefully it can't twist. So I've now got an edge there and an edge there. The base of the lever, which is not this piece, but for example, will fit in there, and it's tight on the other piece. That's the cap, not the lever itself. I'm showing you there, and it's all about not being a tight fit. Yeah. So hopefully limiting the movement significantly, so that the clamp is just holding the two pieces together, and that the slot in that piece, which you can see there, and the shallow slot in that piece work together to hold it firmly, and the clamp just holds it down. Okay, I'm done with this junction. I've put three little tack welds on that nut and a couple on that one, just to hold those nuts in place permanently. I'm not getting, I'm out here swinging on this lever now, I'm not getting any movement at all in it, and I've buzzed around a little bit with the angle grinder just to sweeten things up a little bit. So I'm done with this end, and I can move on. So I found this piece of aluminium in my stockpile. It's about 40 millimeters in diameter. I might use 40 or 50 millimeters of it. I'll stick this whole piece in the lathe if it fits. Turn some sort of knob on this end. I'll start by drilling and tapping M10 for it, so that it screws on to the gear shift, and then ultimately parting it off, flipping it around and cleaning up the other end of it. So I've mounted that piece of bar up in this chuck. It's a 6-jaw chuck. It went up inside the bore of the lathe. I've got enough room to take a 40mm bar, it appears. I've just faced this end off, and I've put a big centre drill in there. I'm about to drill out 8.5mm, because it's an M10 thread, which is 1.5mm pitch. So it's 10 minus 1.5 is the drill size, and I'm going to go ahead and do that, get a rough idea of how deep I have to go. So I'm running a M10 1.5 tap up inside there. I've got a gear wrench, tap wrench ratchet thing on here. I'm using the chuck key to pull the chuck around. I'm not trying to do it under power or anything. And I'll wind that in there just with a bit of WD-40 type lube, and seems to be cutting pretty well. I'm halfway in there already. I'll back it out once and cleared the chips, and I should get it the rest of the way. I've got an M10 1.5 thread in there, at least 20mm, which is the length of the bolt sticking out of the gear lever. I'm going to have a straight section here that I can grip when I part it off and swing the piece around. As for the shape of the knob itself, I'm a little undecided at the moment. I've roughed it out there. I'm pretty much going to just have a plough into it. I only really need to worry about this side of it first, and I think I'll just cut a taper on here down to that step, and perhaps in part way there, fairly steep, maybe 10mm this way and down to there. Get that done, then part it off, and then grip it from this end and worry about how I get the top surface done once it's swung around. Okay, I've cut a fairly random taper. I just set the top slide at an angle that worked, flipped the tool around, and now I'm going to part off. That's the parting off procedure. I've got about, I don't know, 12 millimeters to go with that tool, and then I'll have my knob separated from the stock. Okay, that's my blank that's parted off. You can see the little nib there that the parting off cutter left. I'm going to swing that around in the chuck, grip it on this smaller diameter there. Try and work out what shape I can make out of that now, but fairly happy how that's going. Well, that's what I've come up with as a rough shape, very rough. I've put a little concave section in there. Oh, it's not going to cut your hand. Well, there it is. A little bit of buff up on the rag wheel. Very little imagination going into that shape. I've already dinged it there by dropping it. But hey, it's going to get covered in cow shit. So I think that'll do as a gear shift knob. Well, that's it bolted on. That's it operating in that. I think it's too long. Much happier now with the junction on the bottom. I think it needs a bit of a ride to see how it goes. I had a bit of a go with it this morning, just in the prototype form. Certainly saved the foot. I could ride the bike with a pair of sandals on, because I even had trouble trying to change gears with a pair of runners on, lifting the gear shift with the top of my foot. I can certainly move it into first. I can only drive it in first gear out in my front yard here. It's been a long process to put that together. Fairly happy with the look of the knob. Would probably be happier if it was, I don't know, 60 millimeters shorter, which, yeah, I can cut 60 millimeters out of the middle of that pipe and weld it back together again, and you'd never know. I'll use it as it is, and then sometime it needs a shot of paint.